Welcome back to America's Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Bull. This segment is brought to you by Apto. If you're a commercial real estate broker, you really need to check out apto.com. Well, today we're talking about the top 10 issues affecting real estate, and this is a report that's put out annually by the counselors of real estate. And I think this is so important because in commercial real estate, we are always trying to predict the future. Do we hold? Do we buy? Do we develop? Do we put CapEx? Do we refinance? We always want to look at the future. Well, we looked at the current issues, the top 5. This year they divided into current issues, 5 issues, and then the longer term issues, which can be very important for commercial real estate. My guest is Joe Nahas. He's Senior VP with Equus Partners, and he's joined us on Skype. Joe, thanks for being with us again.
You're welcome, Michael.
Good
morning.
So let's talk about the longer term issues impacting real estate and beyond 2018, 2019, and beyond, right? into the far reaches of time. So now we're going to go countdown backwards. We're going to start with number 5. The number 5 is energy and water. What should we think about?
So energy and water, and this probably gives you one of, as we'll hear this theme on a few of these issues coming up, the real rationale between splitting the list. Development projects in particular, and even investments, as we said earlier, have a little long-term in nature in the real estate space. And if you're doing a development, you're making decisions today that have implications, 2-3 years out, permits, approvals, variances, before I even get to construction. So this topic of energy and water is one which we felt, and our clients were telling us was important, because it's one thing to say, well, what's the state of those matters today in a market that I'm working in? But when I bring my product to market or bring my project to its construction phase, could there be a different outcome? For example, the cost of providing energy from a solar perspective today versus what it might be in 3, 5, 7 years, indications are that cost is going to be falling. And so my design is impacted by that. I might look at a different design component if I think a little bit longer term. Similarly with water, am I in regions that have shortages? We hear a lot about the state of California and, my ability to service my projects. And that'd be a little bit more on the residential front, but would also impact commercial as well. So I need to think a little bit further out what's going on in that space if I'm developing a project.
Yeah, that's a good point, and a really big point today with the changes in sustainability. Everyone wants to save cost, and you talk about solar. I mean, that may be a great way to reduce costs, and then energy. I guess you have to include petro, right? Gasoline. Are we going to be using less of it? How's that impacting commercial real estate?
Well, that's correct, and we know that the whole sustainability area is here to stay. Developers, investors acknowledge the importance of it in projects, and so the features, the advantages of managing energy, managing water, and delivering a product that's sustainable has to be taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, I mean, I go in a lot of buildings, large office buildings and things that are nice, pretty new buildings that we're selling, and you see a lot of these buildings that don't have LED lighting, and there's a lot of features there's a lot of things that we can do in commercial real estate that we've yet to do in that area, right?
That's correct. I mean, energy management systems, you mentioned lighting, there's systems for the restrooms, there's quite a bit that can be done. And most developers today, as I said, have recognized that if they're doing projects that are new, they're looking for certifications that take into account use of those types of systems, use of materials that they get credits for, adaptive use as well. Just by case in point, we just built our own company headquarters, which I'm speaking to you from, and we were able to use quite a few materials from another project we had developed as part of this new construction project, and a lot of efficiency and benefits to us doing that.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I think a lot of companies, when they're picking space for their company, their office, or other facility. It's real important about sustainability and cost and wellness. I think that's a big one. Let's go to number 4, which is really on the minds of people today. That's immigration.
This is certainly in the press day in and day out. And this, of course, Michael, reflects back to the number 2 issue we had on the current issues, which is the political uncertainty. And so, as I said early on, there's some connections among a number of these. But in the immigration front, the challenge here is so much of the growth of the U.S. economy has been immigration-based. It's a source of demand for housing, and perhaps initially multifamily, but ultimately single family. And it's a source of labor, both skilled and unskilled workers. It's new businesses forming. And if you have an uncertain, confusing, controversial, pick your definition or your adjective for your immigration policy, it's going to create uncertainty for folks who are in the real estate space. Uncertainty as to, particularly on the demand side, for tenants, but also on the supply side for workers. And so that's why we felt this was a very important consideration on our list.
Yeah, I think it's a real big one, and we're certainly seeing that affecting a lot of commercial real estate sectors because of the rising salaries, the lack of labor. You think of what are some of the sectors you think would be most impacted?
Well, certainly construction of homes and multifamily. As we know, we have been on a boom of multifamily construction, particularly in major cities and urban areas. But wherever there are construction projects, we know that labor is important. But then there's the labor throughout small town America. As well, which has been a large percentage of immigrant population has chosen to work in those fields, and it's created this challenge as we see as to an uncertain policy and on immigration is going to create more uncertainty for real estate folks.
Yeah, I agree. You look at sectors like hospitality. And they're really impacted by this. Well, let's go to number 3, natural disasters and climate change.
Yeah, so a lot of, again, in the press lately with hurricanes and floods, rising sea levels, and then more recently, of course, volcanic activity. These are issues that, again, from a real estate perspective, we view as long-term because, one, they're unpredictable, but on the other hand, they are here to stay. We know that we're going to be dealing with these, but then there's a sensitivity geographically. So it's one thing if you're looking to do waterfront development in Miami or Boston or some port cities, on the East Coast. It's another thing if you're looking to do things, in the Midwest inland. But in any case, if you want to be an owner, investor, developer, or participate in those activities, there are these types of disasters and the impacts of climate change which are going to play into your decision making.
Yeah, good point. And we have to try to predict where we might have increases or decreases in income, and the same with expenses. And one of those expense items is insurance, right?
Well, it is, and these are driving costs. It's not only the cost of the insurance, but it's the ability to get it. Right. So you have to really look at both of those factors. Is can I get it, and if I can, how much is it going to cost me? Right.
All right, let's go to number 2. Also, another really big one: disruptive technology.
Yes, I think this might have been number 2 overall on last year's full list behind the political uncertainty, if I recall. But again, not surprising that you would see this on our list. It's been there for a few years. I suspect it will be around for a bit as well. We all are fully aware of all of the technologies that are coming about, which have the ability to disrupt the real estate space. We talked a little earlier about the whole e-commerce that was affecting retail and logistics. We now have the beginning of the autonomous car industry, the drone impact. Essentially what we see happening is there are these technologies which are going to, over a longer term, again, impact real estate. So by way of an example, if I may, if you were to go out and buy a commercial office building today or develop a commercial office building today, you have to deal with parking. And you would ask yourself, well, I need a parking garage or I need a parking field, but what in a world of driverless cars am I going to need? And what's the implications of that decision? Well, the obvious one is I might want to be sure I've considered an alternative use for the portions, if not all of that garage space over the long term as a result of the disruptive technology of driverless cars. So these are the types of things that, again, it's on the list, but it's a little longer term in nature, because we know driverless cars aren't going to show up in our communities tomorrow, but they're going to show up in any reasonable person's holding period for a real estate project.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. How should we think about blockchain when we're making decisions in commercial real estate today? What might be the impact there?
Well, we list blockchain as kind of a game changer, if you will, and it's an area that's starting to impact real estate. It's kind of getting its legs about it. It's going to be, at least initially, a disintermediary, we believe. It has the ability to have transactional impact with respect to bringing buyers and sellers together. It has the ability to have impact on property records and how data is stored and shared. So things which will probably lower costs, create more efficiencies. But it's early in the game, but we're being told that the game is moving quickly, and so it's something that needs to be paid attention to.
Yeah. Another item you have in your report under disruptive technology is the potential of buildings to become obsolete faster. And as fast as technology is changing, what should we think about there?
Sure. Well, again, a lot of real estate folks think in terms of vintages. If I buy a project, is it a 10-year-old vintage, a 20-year-old vintage, and those vintages help us define, how we might add some value or create value by making adjustments to the real estate. If I'm in the residential space, it might be a vintage that's, ready for new kitchens and baths, because it's 10, 15, 20 years old. But technology is also an enhancement that needs to be taken into consideration in not only the multifamily space, but also in the commercial space. And so, these older buildings run the risk of some obsolescence if you're unable to, or in some cases unwilling to, can't justify it for some reason, enhance these buildings from a technology aspect. The example being the garage case I gave you. Another might be, in the case of multifamily, wireless connectivity, not just in the unit, but throughout the community. And so those types of things are what tenants are going to demand in the space, and folks, owners, operators need to be prepared to offer that.
Yeah, and I think it brings up some difficult decisions when we think about, well, how much technology should you build into your new project or your renovation project. I was in a new project the other day recently as a customer. I was helping my mother pick out a new senior housing property for herself. Brand new, very nice, but I was really disappointed with the lack of technology.
Well, that's a kind of firsthand experience, and I'm sure you're not alone, again, depending upon the vintage of a product like that. But I would tell you, owners and developers not willing to acknowledge that, make those changes, build that into their plans, are likely to see values deteriorate. That's not going to be a product that's going to be a desirable investment product over the long term.
Yeah, I think you've got to really be careful with that. Well, we're down to number one on the long-term issues affecting real estate, and that's infrastructure.
Yeah, infrastructure, which is obviously a very large, broad category. One of the ways we're looking at it is this notion that a significant amount of private capital has actually been raised in recent years, prepared to invest in the infrastructure space. They see attractive risk-adjusted return opportunities, but there's a significant portion of that capital sitting on the sidelines because of the lack of projects that are available in which to invest. So, for example, and I think that's a result, again, back to our political uncertainty over on our short-term list. We have politics getting in the way of our lawmakers, be they at the federal, state, or even local levels, to truly get behind projects that the market knows are necessary, whether it's roads and bridges, whether it's airport expansions. You could develop energy and water facilities. So here you have a significant amount of private capital willing, but not a number of public projects. And these things are often done in public-private partnerships. And so we have a disconnect. And we think it's a significant one for one very kind of somewhat obvious but basic reason, which is there's no good outcome to this. The longer this scenario exists and these projects are delayed, well, the infrastructure isn't getting better by the passage of time, it's getting worse. So you really need to deal with these issues now, sooner rather than later, and look at them as investments.
Yeah, and I think our audience realizes the extreme importance of infrastructure, but I think we wonder, is there really the labor to do it and the funding?
Well, we heard a lot about that in past years about shovel-ready type projects. So that is a big question. That ties a little bit to the discussion we had about availability of labor. I think the funding on the private side is the least of the concerns. The question is, would there be public funding available? And right now, government agents are telling us that they don't have the stomach, if you will, to put forth significant spending projects. I suspect that the labor would fall into place if you had projects, if you had the right wage levels, the right benefits plans, and so on. Folks will go to where they can maximize their labor output and their income. So I suspect that problem would resolve itself over time if you had projects to work with.
Yeah, well, let's get the projects going. Well, Joe, after you go through these top 10, you went through this whole procedure, you've presented this at the NAR conference and here. When you look at this overall after going through it, what would you leave the audience with that kind of struck you?
Well, I guess what I would say, Michael, is you can't look at any one of these in its own kind of myopic way, even though it's a list of 10, and it's a list of 10 separate and distinct issues, as I made a reference to on a few occasions. They are related. And so sometimes if you begin to kind of resolve or come up with solutions for one, you might find that those are some solutions that work on others. But the point is, we need folks to look at these and consider them if they're in the real estate space, whether they're an owner, a developer, or an investor, or at a minimum, they need to factor them into their risk assessment of the projects that they're undertaking.
Yeah, very important. Well said and great information, Joe. Thanks for joining us today.
You're quite welcome, Michael. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, great information, top 10. We'll have a copy, a link to the actual report at commercialrealestateshow.com. So look for that there. And thank you to the counselors of real estate and Alice for your leadership there and all the CRE counselors that we've had on the show from time to time. Great information. And thank you for being with us. Let us know your comments. Share your comments and on social media and on the show website. And then join us next week. We'll have another great show for you. And until then, be sure you always lead, learn, and laugh. And join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show.